Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So now we know that trees are great candidates for boosting as well if you are using gradient boosting, right, but trees are great candidates for bagging as well, right. So what is the important property in bagging that we talked about? What does bagging help us do? Reduce variance. Reduce variance, right. So bagging allows us to reduce variance, and in fact you can show that the reduction in variance is highest if the classifiers that you are building, okay, are not correlated, right. So I am building many classifiers and the classifiers are predicting the same output, right. So if the classifier parameters that I am estimating are somehow, if I can make them uncorrelated, right, then the reduction in variance is maximum. Kind of intuitive, right. If the classifiers are very correlated, then there is no point, they are not really different classifiers, right, they are going to give me the same output, so the variance will be high. So if I can somehow make the classifiers uncorrelated, then the reduction in variance is high, right. So there is actually a very specific relation between the amount of correlation between the classifiers and the and how much you pay in terms of the reduction in variance, right. So I am not going to derive that, I am just pointing it out to you. So if you want, you can look it up, it is there in ESL, right. And if you think about what we are doing with bagging, right, you are taking one data set, right, and you are sampling with replacement from that, right. So the probability of the trees that you are generating being correlated is rather high, right. The probability of the trees that you are generating being correlated is rather high. So can we come up with some way in which we can reduce the correlation between the trees that you are constructing, right. So I am going to be doing bagging, right. But the goal is to reduce correlation between trees, right. So the people who came up with random forest had a very simple idea for doing this, right. You start doing bagging as you would normally do, okay. So you have your data set, then you create a bag by sampling from sampling with replacement from that data, and now when you start building the tree on this data set, so what you do is at every node, right, sample some p features from your feature set. We use p for the regular feature description, right. So let me use a different. So you have total of p features, right, your data points come from some rp space, you randomly sample some t features from that p features, okay, find out which is the best split point, which is the best split variable among these t features alone. Split the data, go down to each of the subsets, repeat the same process, sample another t variables, right, not necessarily disjoint, right, I am just sample again, okay, sample again t more variables, okay, and then try to find out which is the best split point among these t variables and keep doing this. So what does this get us? See, if you had actually worked with the same data set, right, which I mean if you had just done bagging, at the root level it is highly likely that each one of the bagged trees would have picked the same attribute, right, just because you have subsampled it again, right. So it does not mean that the very predictive attributes will get discarded. So at the higher levels of the trees it will look very similar, right, but now you are getting rid of that. I said okay, you choose, I have chosen randomly, I have chosen t, t variables, and only from them I am choosing the best variable. Therefore, I am reducing the chances that the trees will look similar. In fact, we can show that this leads to significant reduction in the variance in the backed estimate, and random forests end up performing very well. In fact, random forests are competitive with gradient boosted trees in some applications and vice versa, right. So, boosted trees are better than random forests in some applications, and random forests are better than boosted trees in some applications. And because till some time back there are very efficient random forest libraries, people use random forests a lot, right, but now there are also very nice libraries available for gradient boosted decision trees, and therefore try everything and see which works, right. Okay, great. So, people remember what we mentioned by the Bayesian classifier or the Bayes optimal classifier? This is the very first class when we talked about nearest neighbor methods, and so I told you right. Right. Something like this, right, if people remember. Right, and then we said, hey, we can't find this normally because this is not supported in our training data, right. I mean, we probably get one x, right. How do you know what is the class of the probability of a class is given a data point, because you are going to get only one data point in, right, one sample of the data point in your training, and therefore we said we will take an average over a region and so on and so forth, right. So, we will use that estimate over a region for finding the probability. So, this is how we motivated what KNN, right, the k nearest neighbor classifier, right. So, now I am going to take a slightly different tack, right. So, what we want probability of, right, g given x, right. So, we want probability of g given x, right. So, we have our friend the Reverend. How many of you know that Thomas Bayes was actually an ordained priest? Okay, so we have Reverend Bayes to help us out, right. So, it's essentially right. So, then we have a lot of quantities that we can estimate here. We can estimate this from data, right. How will you estimate that from data? How will you estimate that from data? Okay, we will come to that. Can you estimate this from data? Obviously, right. Whatever fraction of a particular class is, you can do that, or you can make assumptions about the class densities, and you can estimate the parameters of those from the data and so on and so forth. That is fairly straightforward to estimate, right. So, what about this guy? But in general, I mean, if you want to do the max, yes. If you don't want to do the max, then this becomes a question, right. So, how do I go about estimating this, right. So, there is one way of doing this. How do you do that? Yeah, so you can assume that you have a right. So what is probability of x? Let us essentially sum up the numerator for all possible g, so I get my denominator. So this I can do. So all we need to know is how to estimate that, right. So can you estimate that? Easy enough. Oh,
Given one class, find the distribution. Take each class and find the distribution of
find the distribution of data points given that class. See, the main problem that will happen in this case is that you will run into sparsity issues, right. So what is going to happen, give me a sec. Right, what is going to happen is you are going to run into sparsity issues because you will not see enough of the data space, right, often enough, right, for me to know. I might get one sample here, one sample there, and so on and so forth, but I might not cover the entire data distribution for me to get a good estimate of the probability distribution. This is especially true when you are talking about really high dimensional spaces, right. Suppose I have, no, we are assuming x comes from some r power p, right. So if p is a 100 dimensional thing, if p is 100, so if x is a data point in r power 100, right. So what is going to happen? Data points are really sparse in this vast space, right. So for me to estimate that becomes hard. So what I have to do is I have to start making some kind of assumptions about this distribution. So I cannot just say that I will be able to estimate it offhand, right. I have to make some kind of assumptions about this distribution. I have to say, hey, so what do we call these distributions? They are called, huh? Somebody louder, put your hand up. Okay, that's not a bad idea. Okay, just say louder. Huh? Class condition distribution. So we typically call them class condition distribution because their probability of x conditioned on the class, right. So sometimes we also call them what? Likelihood. Yeah, I thought somebody would say likelihood before anything else, but people are just keeping quiet. So this is also called the likelihood, but it is a class condition distribution, right. So what is the difference between likelihood and class condition distribution?
It's a function of g and it's a function of x.
So likelihood is a function of g, right. Right, I remember I kept repeating that multiple times when we looked at likelihood, and I am conditioning it on some parameters theta, okay, but it is actually a function of theta. So x is the same, but when I am talking about class condition distribution, I am talking about probability of x, okay, it is actually a function of x conditioned on g, okay. Okay, good. Let us go back. So the most the simplest assumption that we make to get this to be tractable is called the naive Bayes assumption, right. So what does the naive Bayes assumption tell you? It says that given the class label, right, given the class label, so given the class label, the features are independent of each other, right. So what does this tell us? it says that if I have probability of that, I can write this as now this is called the naive Bayes assumption. Then so once I do this, now it becomes very easy to for me to estimate parameters, right. So what I will do now, okay, in how many data points has xi taken a particular value, right, of that particular class, right. So I first segregate all the data points by class, and then okay, in class 1 in how many data points did xi take the value of 0, in class 1 how many data points did xi take the value of 1, in class 2 in how many data points did xi take the value of 0 and xi take the value of 1, so on and so forth. Huh? I am just giving an example. You want me to say xi takes the value of 0, xi takes the value of 1, xi takes the value of 2, xi takes the value of 3, no, I can do that, it just takes a lot of time. So just making it binary so that it is easier for me to speak, right. So it could be anything, right. So xi could be real value, right. For example, always our setting is r power p, right. In that case what do you do?
Some binning, some sort of.
You could, in fact that is one very valid option. In fact, even though many textbooks do not recommend that, but not that they don't, it is not that they actively not recommend it, it is just that they do not even talk about it, okay. But that is actually a valid option, and I will tell you why in a minute. But the usually recommended option is to have some kind of parametric form for these marginal distributions, right. These are conditional marginals, right. If you think about it, right, these are basically marginals. So if this was the joint distribution, right, then this is just the marginal, right. This is the conditional joint distribution, so this is the conditional marginal. So for the conditional marginal they ask you to assume some kind of parametric form, and the usual one that they suggest is a Gaussian, right. Usually they suggest use some kind of a Gaussian form for these conditional marginals, right. Can you read it at the back? Can? Okay. We can read it. Okay, fine. Okay. No, because the thumb didn't stay up long enough, so I was not able to make sure which direction it was. You just did something like that, and right. But then, what is the problem in using a Gaussian? All of you know what the problem is. Just think for a minute, or lesser. Huh? Okay, not a big issue. There's a much bigger issue than that.
Too much inductive bias.
But the wrong kind of inductive bias. Why is it wrong? What do you know about the Gaussian? Sorry?
More property. The value
Close.
near to mean will have more property.
Close. So what does it mean? It's unimodal. Right? The Gaussian is unimodal, right? Suppose there are two different values of xi which are separated, right? Which are very probable, right, for this particular class. If you use the Gaussian, what will you estimate the most probable point as? Their mean. Okay. So if say 3 is very popular, very likely to occur, and 5 is very likely to occur, your Gaussian will say 4 is the most probable value for x given the class, right. So you do not want that to happen, right. So that is the reason I said binning makes sense, but then the problem is you have to find the right kinds of bins, because when you are using the discrete distribution, there is no, I mean, it can be multimodal, right. I mean, there is no notion of like unimodality there, right. So I could have one output having a very high probability, another output having a very high, I could have like 10 different outputs having high probabilities, everything else having low probability, it could be anything, right. So there I do not have to worry about these, but then the problem here is you have to find the right binning, right. So that is the whole set of lectures by themselves, right. So how do you bin your input variables? There are many ways in which you can bin input variables, and there you have to keep coming up with cleverer tricks depending on the application you have, and so on and so forth. It's actually not trivial, right, and you could do that, but of course the Gaussian is just a simple example. If you know that the data is going to be multimodal, right, what should you be using? Mixture of Gaussians, not a single Gaussian, use a mixture of Gaussians, and you will get there, right. Okay. So how well you think naive Bayes would work? Seems to be a very simplistic assumption, right. It is even called naive Bayes. Right. Even though I have actually never heard it used in any papers or any literature, so Hasty, Tibshirani, Friedman says that it is also known as the idiot Bayes algorithm. Okay. So naive Bayes just sounds a little better, more sophisticated, right. Yeah, do you think naive Bayes will work well? It did work really well, right? Weren't you amazed? You didn't know how simplistic it was at that time, is it?
We hadn't done anything else, so this was our only method.
Compare it against SVMs. Didn't you compare it against SVMs? You should. So it turns out that let us say for examples like text classification, where your data dimensions are inherently very high, right, it is incredibly hard to beat naive Bayes. You know, it looks like it's something so simplistic, right. I mean, look at the assumption you are making. So I have a lot of text, I want to classify them as politics or sports, okay, that is one very simple problem that is out there. It's a standard problem that people use for text classification, right. There is a standard data sets. I want to classify a news article as being sports or politics, and what am I saying here? So given that it is sports, the probability that I will see cricket is independent of the probability that I will see football. Not only that, the probability I will say cricket is independent of the probability I will see, say, Dhoni in the document. Sounds like nonsense, right? Well, if you are talking about Indian media, yes, right. But in general, right. So it seems very surprising, right. So that is because we are trying to assign all kinds of semantics to what is happening, and but the algorithms that we are trying to use, whether it be SVM or anything else, are really not into the semantics of these things, right. So we are only worried about it because we have all these other knowledge based superstructures that we have built, and that we are trying to look at the data through that, right. At the end of the day, if you look at it, it's more a question of things occurring together, co-occurring, and in a very large document space, right. So the probability of any words co-occurring, right, is kind of diminishing, right. So if I don't know it is a document about cricket, right, and if I see the word Dhoni, then I will say okay, now maybe the probability of me seeing something with actually a sports related term goes up, because I did not know whether it was a sports document or a politics document before I looked at it, right. But given that I know it is a sports document, right, the probability of me seeing this will anyway be higher, right. It is not going to change appreciably because the word Dhoni appeared. You see the reasoning. If I had not known anything about the document, because the word Dhoni appeared in it, right, the likelihood that it is a sports document goes up, right. Well, given the nature of Indian cricket, the probability that it is politics has not gone to 0 yet, right. So, but if I had known that it is already a sports document, knowing that okay it is Dhoni, the word Dhoni appeared in it, really does not appreciably change the other probabilities. Okay, so that is essentially the idea here, because the number of words are very very large. If there are only like 10 possible words or 10 possible values that these features can take, then there will be appreciable change even if I know the value for one feature, but each of those words can take something like 10,000 different outcomes. So it ends up becoming actually a pretty good approximation, right, when you are doing it in practice. If you remember, I told you something like KNN would be bad if you are in a 100 dimensional space or a 1000 dimensional space, and imagine text is a very very large dimensional problem, right. So what will be the typical dimension for text classification? Yeah, so naively modeling it, you can get 24,000, right. You can do some kind of feature reduction and so on and so forth, try to reduce it to smaller state space, but still it is pretty large, right, tens of thousand dimensions. So if you try to do KNet in that, things are not going to work that well, but people still do that, right. So all this cosine similarity based retrieval systems and other things that people used to do in the past were all nearest neighbor kind of techniques, and not that they do not work, but something like naive Bayes when you want to do classification works tremendously well in this. You can seriously, I am challenging you, go try it out against SVMs, right. You will find that maybe there is like a couple of percentage difference, right, and the math is so much simpler. There are a few things which I should point out about naive Bayes. One of the biggest advantage of naive Bayes is that I can have mixed mode data, right. I can have some of the attributes being discrete valued, some of the attributes being continuous valued and everything, and it is fine for naive Bayes. So what other classifier can you say that? Trees, right. Anything that is based on trees are also pretty robust when it has kind of mixed thing, and you do not even have to do any kind of normalization of those attributes also, right. I can just keep each attribute, one thing can run from 1 to a million, other one can run from 0 to 0.1, it is all fine, right. When I am looking at other more numeric classifiers in the sense of the kind of computations that they do distance based computations and things like that, there I have to normalize things, right. In neural networks, if something goes from 1 to a million and the other one is going from 0 to 0.1, the feature that runs from 1 to a million will overpower the feature that runs from 0 to 0.1, right. I should ideally be normalizing everything to 0 to 1, right. So those kinds of things I do not have to do in naive Bayes, right. It is all clean and I think. The second thing I do not have to do is any kind of feature encoding. Normally I do not have to do any feature encoding, I do not have to convert this into some kind of code, so I do not have to take red and convert it into some code word so that I can feed it into my neural network, right. How will I feed red into my neural network? You have to encode it somehow, right. Whether you use the RGB value for the color or whether you use some other encoding for the color, you will have to do something about it, right. I do not have to worry about all of that in this. The same thing in decision trees as well, right. So that is one thing. The second thing I want to talk about is how do you handle missing values, right. If x is continuous, if xi is continuous, we are all fine, right. We are anyway using a Gaussian, the Gaussian has a infinite support, so something else which you have never seen in the training data comes, you will always assign some probability to it. But what about discrete valued things, right? So I have trained my classifier by looking at data, right, that has red, blue and green in that thing, and in the test time somebody comes along with yellow. What do I do? I can assign it a probability of 0. Huh?
All the exercise beforehand, so that
What if I don't have all the exercise beforehand?
we can have one more exercise.
I mean, things like neural networks would cover that, right? I mean, something I haven't seen beforehand, as long as I have some encoding for it, it will just take care of it. I don't need to have actually seen it in the training.
During the training phase, we may introduce some new XI with some non-zero probability, and
We don't know if that xi is going to come or not. Say we have to somehow account for all the unseen xi's somehow. So there are multiple ways in handling this. In naive Bayes, one thing which you can do is you can just ignore that attribute. Don't multiply it in and make it 0. Just ignore it. Look at all the attributes you do know the probabilities for, okay, and then multiply it. That's the problem with that. What is the problem? Huh? Sorry? You are assuming the probability is 1, right? So your role will be overestimating the probability. So you will have to come up with some mechanism by which you will normalize that, right? If you are using lesser features, you will have to come up with some mechanism by which you are normalizing that, right? So that is something which you will have to think about. The other one is called smoothing, right? Smoothing is essentially similar to what Ishu was saying earlier, is that you assume that everything that you could possibly see, right, has occurred at least once in the training. Okay. That means that you will give it some probability at least, you will not make it 0, and you will also take care of this overestimating problem, right. You will not make it 1, you will make it like 1 by 10,000 or something. There will be very, very small probability that you assign to all the unseen values in the training data. So when at test time, at least you will not assign 0 value to that data point, right. If everything else is very probable except that the color is yellow, right. So you will not make the probability 0, the probability will get depressed significantly, but it will at least not go to 0. Okay, so this is one thing. The problem with smoothing is the following: if there are a lot of values that you don't see, right, suppose this color, okay, I see only 4 colors in training, but my actual color space is 256, right, right. So I mean obviously, right, so or my actual color space is 64,000, okay, and I see only 4 colors in training. What will happen?
doesn't this mean that the training data didn't represent the actual?
It does. I am just talking about practical issues here. If I do smoothing in such a situation, what happens? Obviously it means your training data is messed up, so you will have to think about it. But if you use smoothing blindly in this situation, what will happen? Exactly, you will smooth the heck out of your probability distribution, right. You are taking this probability of 1, you are dividing it among 64,000 guys, so everybody should get a count of 1 at least, right. Suppose I have 10,000 training points, right, the best count I can hope for is if all the 10,000 are of same color, it will get 10,000 by 64,000. No, it will get 10,000 by 74,000. So each one of the 64,000 I will count at least once, and actual 10,000 has happened, so 74,000. It will be 10,000 by 74,000 will be the probability for the color which occurred in all your training data points. Okay, that is a really, really small value for the color. So smoothing, you have to be very careful when you apply smoothing, right. So if there are too many unobserved values and you smooth it blindly, right, so you will essentially lose all the information in the training data. You will have to come up with other mechanisms, like Ishu was pointing out. There is something wrong with your training data first, right. So you have to go back and try to fix that, see if you can generate more representative sample. So those are the things that you should look at, right. So anything else? Right, so we know how to do P of G, right. So we know how to do P of X once we know how to do this, and this we know how to do by doing this. So parameter estimation is taken care of, and these are the ancillary things.